Alright, NFL free agency is right around the corner and the Eagles are sitting pretty. Granted, there's still several moves to take care of and it's looking like an NFC rival is making a play at Isaiah Rodgers. However, the Birds could surprise some people with one insider suggesting a trade of Kenny Pickett is possible. So let's talk about why Howie might do that and look at the most intriguing options on the market and why they make sense. But first, let's run it. What's up guys, free agency is right around the corner and Philly has so many options. However, before we get to that, I wanted to point out that the Eagles dropped a 25-minute mic'd up video from the Super Bowl. And it probably goes without saying, but if you haven't seen it yet, then you're missing out. Because quite honestly, I can't get enough of reliving that Super Bowl victory. Of course, my favorite part was getting the behind-the-scenes look at Jalen Hurts still wanting to go back in despite the Birds already being up by 40.
If I had Philly, I'd have let that ride.
We up 40-something.
I know, bro, but I mean, we killing. Huh? I'm saying no.
I honestly don't blame him, especially after what happened in 2023, with Jalen later saying in this year's Super Bowl celebration while seeing the confetti that those are the colors they're supposed to be. Also, talking about victories, congrats again to David Ronimus for winning this signed Nolan Smith helmet, and if you want to get in on one of the next giveaways, win a piece of history, then just do me a favor, hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed of course, and then go down to the comments section and let me know which free agent you think Philly's going to go after. Also, as always, stay on the lookout for those bestie scammer comments. Reminder, my profile will have a checkmark next to it and I'll always announce on my show who won the actual prize. Anyway, back to the Super Bowl squad, there's no secret about how special this entire unit was. Yet the unfortunate reality at this time of year, like we all know, is that you just can't keep everyone and you have to make some tough decisions. However, as I've been saying for a couple weeks and we've gotten a few reports, it's looking more and more likely that Mekhi Becton will be one of the pieces to come back. After we got another report from NFL insider Tony Pauline that the Mountain prefers to come back to Philly. Again, we've heard that for a while, but the update here is that Pauline says he's hearing that things could take some time before there's an ultimate decision one way or the other, with Becton's camp likely to wade through various offers and allow the Eagles to match whatever else is out there. So even though legal tampering begins on Monday and then free agents can officially be signed on Wednesday, this thing could get drug out a bit, but I just wanted to mention that because if it takes a little bit longer, don't freak out, there's still a definite chance that Becton returns. Plus, Howie Roseman has freed up more than enough cap space to get something done. It just comes down to will the Birds pull the trigger, or is Jeff Stoutland confident in Tyler Steen or whoever else they try to fill in at right guard? Personally, I'm going to maintain that they do bring back Becton. I mean, not necessarily at like the 95% chance that I said for Zack Baun, but I'd say somewhere around like 65 to 70% chance. And honestly, no matter what range you're at, it's beginning to look like Isaiah Rodgers is less likely to return to Philly, after Pat Leonard shared that the New York Giants are actually trying to swoop in and steal Zay. Of course, my hope is that it's just a divisional rival trying to bump up the price the Eagles got to pay. Although anyone who's watched the Giants know they could use cornerback help. And okay, yeah, help just about everywhere. So we'll see where this one plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised if a team sees Zay's potential and offers him an enticing contract. Now, the other thing that comes into play is Kenny Pickett being traded. By the way, in case you haven't heard the latest rumor here, so Diana Rossini reported that the Las Vegas Raiders were exploring veteran quarterback options on the free agent market and the trade market, which naturally led to a speculation that KP could be a potential option for Vegas. Except it didn't take long for those rumors to be squashed after the Seahawks sent Geno Smith in a trade to the Raiders to be their quarterback of the future. However, even though that option may be off the table, I wouldn't totally rule out something about trading Pickett. Especially because, yeah, a lot of us already believed in Tanner McKee, but after this past season in limited work, I think the Eagles can feel pretty good if they were to move on from KP and make McKee QB2. Granted, you're probably not getting a third-round pick for Pickett, but even if you can jump up somewhere in the mid-round, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Which is the same thing beat writer Reuben Frank said, in that he believes Howie Roseman will be able to get a mid-round pick back for Pickett, with the Birds GM continuing to search for potential landing spots for KP. Of course, obviously nothing for certain, but just the fact that a couple beat writers have suggested this now definitely is noteworthy. I am curious, though, at least to get a pulse check, but how much would it take to, part ways with Pickett and accept a trade there? Now, while you're letting me know that in the comments, I'm not going to ask you about Myles Garrett again, because it's just about the constant topic the last few weeks. But in case you hadn't heard the latest update there, NFL insider Ian Rappaport said he would be very surprised if the Eagles traded for Garrett based on what he's hearing. And yeah, that's fine. Honestly, I don't doubt it, especially as of right now, but still, it feels like Garrett could be in a similar situation as Pickett. AKA, the closer we get to the draft, or maybe even after it, then we might see things start heating up. Although since we have talked a ton about Myles Garrett, let's look at some different options that may be more immediate. How about Cincinnati's Trey Hendrickson? After all, the Bengals are allowing him to seek out trades with other teams, and with 17.5 sacks last season, he's definitely still got game. But here's the issue. According to Jeremy Fowler, even if a team acquired Hendrickson, he's demanding well above $30 million per year. And then, of course, when it comes to Cincinnati's demands, Fowler's hearing it would most likely take a second-round pick to get a trade done. So sure, if that's the asking price, I don't necessarily mind doing that. It's just at $30 million per year, I'm not getting locked into that when there's other areas to look at in free agency. Plus, there are cheaper options, like Harold Landry, for instance, who the Tennessee Titans released and is now able to try to find his next team. And at face value, the idea of signing a guy who just had 9 sacks this season ago may seem like a good idea. However, let me just caution, because there's a reason the Titans weren't able to find a trade partner. Because when you dig a little bit deeper, Landry is nowhere close to a premier pass rusher, at least worthy of a big deal. In fact, he was dead last in pass rush win rate and had an abysmal pressure rate of just 7% last season. I mean, maybe if Howie could sign him for a super cheap deal, but personally, I just pass on this dude and stay away. Here it is. The name I'm honestly more of a fan of is Khalil Mack. I mean, look, if you want to go get a proven vet who wants to win a ring, has experience with Vic Fangio, and is playing at a really high level in all phases, then Mack is the guy you at least got to check on his asking price. Because this is a dude who ranked 20th in pass rush win percentage while also grading out as the second best run defense grade. So seriously, think about it. Imagine adding him with Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt, and whoever you draft in this year's draft. I'm just saying, that's something that I could get behind, assuming that he's not priced out of Howie's range. Of course, the other area to consider is linebacker, because the biggest move is thankfully done in Zack Baun. But there's still a question of who plays next to him this upcoming season. Now hear me out, I'm not knocking Nakobe Dean, but he's rehabbing and likely won't be ready until midway through the season at best, with other reports suggesting it may not be until the following season before he has full explosiveness in his knee back. Granted, sure, there's the possibility of bringing Oren Burks back, and who wouldn't love to pair up the Super Bowl winning linebackers to try to run it back? Although if, for whatever reason, Philly can't get that deal done, there is an intriguing option to reunite with Fangio and Baron Browning. Because for one, Browning was linked to Philly back during the trade deadline simply due to his connection with Fangio. Also, in case you weren't aware, Browning started out playing inside linebacker as a rookie in Fangio's defense, and it wasn't until Fangio left that he was moved to more of an edge role. So at 6'3", 240 pounds, I would love to see Howie at least gauge what his price might be and see if he's someone they can add. Think about it. You have the versatility of a guy who played with Fangio, and his rookie season was the off-ball linebacker, so he could do that. Maybe you move him back there, but also he has the ability to rush the passer at times. So, send it on unorthodox blitzes. We saw Baun do that several times. 6'3", 240. It's certainly one you can't not look at. I mean, especially if the Eagles lose a little bit of their pass rush and look to create pressure by capitalizing on athleticism. I don't know, just something to throw out there and at least think about. But either way, with so many endless options and free agency right around the corner, I had Eagles writer Anthony DeBona on to discuss all the latest news and which players might make the most sense for Philly.
Josh Sweat or Milton Williams return, and what are the percentages or chances of that?
Well, it feels like for weeks, right? Even a couple of weeks ago, dating back to when they were still playing, like everybody talked about how both players changed their agents relatively recently. So usually that's a sign that guys are going to want to chase the money. They both deserve whatever they're about to get paid in free agency. It seems like most outlets have them as the top defensive tackle or close to the top defensive end. Like in that range, they're both pretty much the top player at their position or very close to it in regards to free agency. So it seems like all signs point to them both departing in free agency. And especially when you look at a team like, say, Arizona, where Jonathan Gannon, the head coach, worked with both of these guys, and he's already kind of a hated figure in Philadelphia, but now he might take two players that contributed to Philadelphia's most recent Super Bowl victory. So I think a team like that, a team like Carolina and New England, those are all already rumored landing spots for both players. So I think more likely than not, both players will be gone. And if I had to put a percentage on it, I'm thinking probably 80 to 90% they'll both be leaving, because it just doesn't seem like the Eagles already have replacements in-house to kind of fill those voids. They didn't really have that with Zack Baun, and we saw how they got that deal done. So I just feel like if you're reading the tea leaves, it seems like both players will be leaving.
And also with the Max Crosby deal, not that Josh Sweat's at the Max Crosby level, but I think that we were texting about this. You had mentioned a few tweets as well. But, with Max Crosby getting a $106 million deal, then you're looking at saying, okay, Josh Sweat, it's very possible for him to get $20 million plus, because, that's what, 35.5 for Max Crosby. That's a significant decrease, but Sweaty's been playing at that level where you're like, okay, the salary cap, the metrics there, you look forward. Does Howie Roseman ultimately do that, especially if they're looking forward with the future they have, as you talk about Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt, and there might be some other options out there in free agency. So I'm going to be curious. I know everybody else is. Milton Williams, similar as well. Osa Odigizua for the Cowboys got an $80 million contract, so $20 million range rumored for the Patriots, the Panthers. But when we look at The defense in particular, maybe start with defensive line, but defense in general, the free agency is right around the corner. Legal tampering, because illegal tampering has been happening already, but legal tampering happens on Monday. And then Wednesday would be the official day for players to get signed. Hopefully they have not had too much tampering of that sort. It's just a mess, ridiculous. But anyway, on that note, people want to know, what are the top defensive targets in your mind? You've perused everything. Shout out to you. I've got a link in the description as well, because you have a ridiculous amount of names, more names than anybody else would come up with, for links to Philly, relationships, all that. But a couple names on the defensive side that stand out to you.
So just funny enough, that the first guy that I'm going to talk about is actually a guy that would have made that list if he was released before I actually published that article, but he was released conveniently like a little bit afterwards. So, but also going back to Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, that's something that Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie both talked about, is how the Eagles kind of plan on playing the compensatory pick game. And in that regard, that means they're probably expecting to lose a couple high-priced free agents, such as Sweat and Williams. And then they would also probably be looking to sign more players that were cut by other teams because they don't count against the compensatory pick formula. So, therefore, a guy like Draymond Jones, defensive lineman, very versatile, can kind of play up and down the defensive line. He has experience in Denver with Vic Fangio, played in Seattle with Clint Hurt as well. He makes a ton of sense for the Eagles in that regard. And I feel like the fact that he has experience playing with multiple defensive coaches for the Eagles, won't count against the compensatory pick formula. It just makes a ton of sense for both sides.
That's an incredibly important part that you bring up too. And I know I've gotten a lot of people understand the compensatory pick formula. Some people don't, totally understandable. Basically, in its most watered down sense, it's as a player goes away, if they get, it's kind of judged based on their contract and the level of contract that they get. And then it's prorated or graded of sorts of, okay, then the Eagles will get, for example, we said Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, somewhere around third round pick for next year is the speculation. Could be a fourth round, but third or fourth round. So yeah, when you're making these moves, especially if you're anticipating getting something like that, then going after a player, I'm all in favor of, for one, you talk about the connections that he has with Fangio, Clint Hurt, the familiarity there, and not that every player is like this, but we saw what happened to a Bryce Huff and not being familiar with a system like that. So sure, go with a player who's more familiar and does not have that compensatory pick counting against you. I appreciate that one, but I think that there's a couple other options out there as well. But yeah, it never hurts to have familiarity in a Fangio defense.
And then for my next one, I'm going to go to another guy that the Eagles are kind of linked to at last season's trade deadline, but the Giants doing what they do best. They didn't move on from a player that's probably going to leave in free agency at the trade deadline, and a guy that has multiple connections to Philadelphia because he's played with a bunch of the Georgia Bulldogs. Apparently, his parents met and then got married in Philadelphia, and that's Azeez Ojulari, edge rusher for the Giants. Only 24 years old. Like I said, he played at Georgia with a bunch of Eagles players. A ton of pass rush upside. He showed a lot of that last season when Kayvon Thibodeau went down for the Giants and he kind of stepped in. But on the flip side, he's kind of never really established himself as a full-time starter in New York when he was there, which is a little bit concerning. But then again, we saw the Giants, like a ton of players have left New York and kind of ascended. Obviously, Saquon Barkley did. A lot of other guys around the league, both Xavier McKinney, going back to other years. But there's plenty of players that they didn't have the greatest start to their career in New York and then left and found out that the grass is a lot greener in certain areas. So maybe another guy kind of follows from Saquon Barkley's footsteps to Philadelphia, and Azeez Ojulari makes a lot of sense on the edge for the Eagles.
I'd be all for that as well. Yeah. I keep looking at this too. I'll be honest. I keep looking at different free agent options, and I know that I guess the fear you can kind of get in this game of looking at all these players. Oh, hey, that'd be great for that'd be a good one. There's so many, right? Because you just look at that. Howie's going to be calculated with this, but at the same time, as he said in a number of press conferences, and as we already know, any player, just about any player who is available, a potential, you see some sort of relationship there, or if they can help the team out just in general, he said that the calls are going to be made, they're going to look into it. So that one certainly within your division like that too, you're very familiar with. That one feels like an extra, like, okay, we're going to certainly do our due diligence and then see what he might be in order to bring him to Philly. I don't know, have you seen, would it be a compensatory pick against or I guess, cancel out in that sense? Do you know about where? I haven't seen any speculation of where that would fall, but where it might.
I haven't seen any it doesn't seem like he has he's definitely going to get $15 million a year. Because like I said, he's kind of been an inconsistent player and has had an inconsistent role with the Giants. So I feel like it's going to really depend on the team that signs him and how they view him. I personally think he can get around maybe that $8 to $10 million a year because I think he has that potential. But then again, he might take less of a contract, like a lower deal to go to a team like the Eagles, where he saw guys like he saw the production that Josh Sweat had, and if he said, "Hey, I can just sign a 1 year deal for maybe incentivize up to $5 million and kind of bank on myself and fill that role or fill the role as the third guy, as Jalen Hurts or Brandon Graham did, and kind of work my way in that role." Like people are going to see how the Eagles treat players after they play well. They see how players get treated once they leave Philadelphia after great seasons. Like it's a great place to go to and kind of bet on yourself. So a lot of these younger players, I think, are going to see Philadelphia as an attractive option.
And why shouldn't they? Quite honestly, because like you said, you see the Saquon Barkley. There's been arguments both sides. I get it, but like objectively, does it make the most sense to go ahead and reward your running back and to extend and get that done after just 1 year into the contract? But at the same time, you reward. You got a Super Bowl. He deserves it for sure. But to get that done, the Baun one, and we can get into more of the reactions. But I think that it's a fair point that you make because you have all these other free agents, whether they're ones that would be signed or even guys that are not free agents, but just on the trade block. Because we have the Trey Hendrickson of the world, Myles Garrett. Real quickly before we get into the other individual there, I was going to insert this. I didn't ask you beforehand, but I was curious. The Myles Garrett we've talked about a ton. Trey Hendrickson, though, is then the next big name. And again, it's like, okay, every single guy, look at Howie Roseman. Maybe it's a possibility. Does that one seem as likely to you as I mean, Myles Garrett's kind of a pipe dream of sorts, but does that one seem as likely as a Myles Garrett?
I don't know, because like you look at Trey Hendrickson and like you look at the numbers, especially like phenomenal pass rusher. But then on the other side, I feel like the thing that's so attractive about Myles Garrett is like his versatility, his athleticism. Like he's literally been dominating the league for years, where Trey Hendrickson's been really good the last 2 years. But before that, he's kind of had up and down production. So I also feel like he's more of like traditionally like a 4-3 base defensive end. I don't know how much of a role he'd have as like a 3-4 outside linebacker in Vic Fangio's scheme, where he likes to kind of drop guys in coverage a little bit or move them around to the interior or loop them around. Like, I don't know if Trey Hendrickson's so much of a fit there, but at the same time, he is so good of a pass rusher that if the Eagles do want to like get a little crazy and throw, like you said, a day 2 pick, or because I think he's going to be cheaper than whatever it's going to cost to get Myles Garrett. And obviously he's going to want a new contract. It's not going to be probably in the Max Crosby, Myles Garrett range, but it might be close. So are you really going to commit that amount of capital and draft picks to a guy that might not be a great fit for your defense? Because we saw how that happened with Bryce Huff. So I don't know if it's necessarily a risk that they might take, but then again, they might just think that, hey, this guy has such a good pass rusher that it might be worth the risk.
One of the top, I think, number 2, if I'm not mistaken, number 2 in pass rush win rate last season. It speaks for itself, 17.5 sacks in last couple of years. But yeah, that's certainly worth considering, because I think a lot of times people look at it and go, and I'm guilty of this as well, but you see like just the stats of a certain player. Bryce Huff is the immediate that you could throw there for the defense in this case and scenario. But you look at the stats and say, oh, well, he should automatically translate. Or you even go to the stint of like a Harold Landry. People say, oh, he had 9 sacks last year. That might be but when you really break it down, Harold Landry had an atrocious pass rush win rate. Like he picked up sacks, so good for him, but that does not necessarily mean that you're going to get that same type of production. The analytics say that he kind of lucked into that role. Now, maybe he goes to whoever and he has another close to double-digit sack season, but that is very different. I'm not totally opposed to Trey Hendrickson because of, he's got the pass rush win rate, he's proven it, but you do make a fair point. Not all schemes, not all systems are the same. Tell us about the final player on your list here for potential options.
So I know my first 2 were in the trenches, but I'm actually going to go in the secondary because obviously the Eagles have moved on from James Bradbury, Darius Slay, who knows if he's going to come back. Based on the recent things on social media, it seems like I would trend towards him not returning, but the Eagles could, like I said, in terms of these younger players that might have not gotten a fair shake in their former teams, I feel like a guy like Asante Samuel Jr., who played with the Chargers, obviously his dad played in Philadelphia, he makes a lot of sense for the Eagles as far as a guy to kind of maybe come in and challenge Keely Ringo and on the outside and if they want to bring a competition there. If they don't bring back a guy like Isaiah Rodgers, I still think that should be their number 1 plan as far as the plan moving forward at cornerback on the outside. But I think a guy like Asante Samuel makes a lot of sense if they do want to go externally, because he's only 25 years old. He has a ton of production on ball in terms of making plays in the air. 9 interceptions, 43 pass breakups in just 50 games. But on the flip side, he's a little bit smaller, only 5'10", 180 pounds, misses a lot of tackles. Last season had a shoulder injury, so I don't think he's going to get a hefty deal, even though he did show a ton of promise early in his career, but he might be a guy that's kind of looking to rebuild his value, and obviously Philadelphia could be a great spot for that. And it would also be cool, selfishly, to see Asante Samuel Jr. and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. kind of running it back. Both of their fathers played together in 2009. It'd be pretty cool to see that happen again in Philadelphia.
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought that up because you mentioned it in one of the live streams. You're like, hey, how sweet would that be to have the Asante Samuel Jr. and Jeremiah Trotter Jr.? So it would look pretty good. And the Kelly Green, having those guys back there, I would not knock that. I would not hate that one. I am with you, though, by the way, too, about the Zay. Hopefully we get a contract. I texted him well wishes the other day. I got a heart on the message, so I'm sure, I can't talk about anything specifically because it's illegal tampering period. But we'll see. Hey, maybe you come back to Philly. That would be good. As far as offense, though, because we mentioned the defense here, there's still some other potential moves that, even though the Eagles do have a lot set on the offensive side, who are potential maybe options out there or guys to keep an eye out for.
So unfortunately, the offensive side, just based on how stacked their roster is, it's not going to be the sexiest names that I've had listed here. But the first one I'm going to start off with, and tell me if this reminds you of anybody. So they were a first-round pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, offensive lineman. They've had injury issues and questions about their effort in the team that they've first been with. So it kind of sounds like Mekhi Becton, if you ask me. But I'm talking about Jedrick Wills Jr. from the Browns. He's still just 25 years old, a ton of starting experience at left tackle, hasn't played anywhere else in the NFL, but he has a nagging knee injury that started in 2023. There were questions about his effort level this past season because it seemed like the Browns thought he can play through injury. He didn't end up losing his starting job. So it certainly seems like he's done in Cleveland. I don't know if he's going to have a huge market, although he does have a ton of experience, like I mentioned, and he did play really well to start his career. But once again, if Mekhi Becton leaves in free agency, could this be a guy that they bring in and either have him work in like that Fred Johnson role where he's a backup offensive tackle, or could they convince him, hey, look what we did with Mekhi Becton. We got him a huge bag in free agency. What if you sign here for 1 year, play right guard between all of these Pro Bowlers and all pros, and then see how that goes? So I think it might be a kind of an interesting fit for Philadelphia.
It goes back to the comment you were saying before. You make these moves and all the free agents see it for Philly. So absolutely, if I'm an offensive lineman, I'm going, yes, please, because to your point of what happened to Mekhi Becton, you get to be coached by the best offensive line coach in the NFL. Makes sense from that side. So prove yourself. The Browns are, I don't know what they're doing necessarily, trying to get out of cap hell and move things around and, I don't know, potentially hold Myles Garrett hostage. But yeah, that's a move I could certainly see playing out. I would still hope, and if I had to guess, I'm going to say that Mekhi Becton returns. But if he does not, you prepare yourself for other alternatives, and that's definitely a good one.
Yeah, and then moving on to a little bit of a sexier position, I guess, on the outside skill position. But we know Britton Covey, he's there. They haven't tendered him yet. I doubt they will, because it would be in like the $3 million range based on the numbers this season. So he's going to test the open market. I'm assuming he might return to Philadelphia and be the punt returner once again. But a guy that they could look at is Devin Duvernay, a former Pro Bowl and All-Pro returner, was with the Ravens, most recently with the Jaguars, but they cut him. They signed him to a 2-year deal last offseason, but they cut him this year as they try to cut a ton of salary. But he, like I said, he's been a great returner. He can return kicks and punts, so not necessarily just punts like Britton Covey was. And although he has a lot more experience in the NFL, he's actually still 6 months younger than Britton Covey, because Britton Covey came in as a much older prospect because he was at Utah and whatnot. But
as an old
there
man.
are a couple concerns with Duvernay. Is he had a hamstring injury that landed him on IR last season, and he only has 15 catches over the last 2 years. So he'd pretty much be just a return specialist, but it might actually be an upgrade over Covey and kind of get Cooper DeJean back there from returning those punts and scaring everybody.
Yes. I mean, he did great, right? We love Coop. Coop did fantastic. Didn't cost us. He's your slot corner. He is, he's that of the future. So anything that we can do to get somebody else there in that position, I'm all for that. Whether it is Britton Covey, if he comes back, or sure, Devin Duvernay, I'll take that. Absolutely. Who's the last one on the list?
And I feel like we've talked about it, or I've personally talked about, like, kind of getting younger at tight end for years now, and they haven't necessarily done it in the draft. This is definitely the draft to do so. So I still think that they'll do that this year. But if they do move on from Dallas Goedert, or if they do just want to bring in another younger option. I like Tommy Tremble a lot from the Carolina Panthers. He's only 24 years old. He'll turn 25 before the season starts. But he was actually with Parks Frazier, who's the new Eagles pass game coordinator in Carolina for one season. They were together in 2023. He's kind of been used all over by the Panthers as well. While he doesn't have a ton of, production, he's only reached about 180 to 200 yards, it seems like, each season. But he's played 34% in the slot, 11% out wide, 53% in line. So he's kind of been used all over the place on their offense. And his father, Greg Tremble, actually ended his NFL career with the Eagles going all the way back to 1995. So maybe a little homage to his father there. But like I said, the real con is he hasn't really been productive. And he was a kind of a highly touted prospect, I guess, a little bit coming out of Notre Dame, but hasn't really put it together in the NFL. And he did score a touchdown against the Eagles last season. But like I said, it would be a kind of a low risk, medium reward for the Eagles.
Multiple connections with Philly. The other question would be blocking wise. I think that's the constant, concern or potential of his tight end game. But can he block? Where's his?
I mean, if the bar is Grant Calcaterra,
yes,
I feel like
most guys
I was going with
that. Yes,
will be above Grant Calcaterra.
Sorry,
so
Grant.
That's why I kind of mentioned his inline experience too, because I've looked at other tight ends and a lot of them are just like used in the slot or they're used out wide. They're not even really. A lot of tight ends aren't the old school tight ends these days. So I feel like Tommy Tremble does have that inline blocking experience where he would be an upgrade over Grant Calcaterra in that regard, in my opinion.
Okay, I was going to say that is one of the quicker questions, I think, especially when it comes to tight end. If it's Dallas Goedert, maybe different, right? Because you could go to more of a pass catching and figure out something else block wise. But if you go there, probably can he block? What will happen there? Okay, I like that. The next question though becomes we're very close again to free agency. The Eagles have locked up some guys internally. Still more moves to happen. We talked about it a little bit. You got Mekhi Becton options, Isaiah Rodgers. Heck, there's Oren Burks out there. A number of different guys and potentials that you could bring back. But in your mind, put you on the spot a little bit. Who do you think gets done first? Who would you say internally that Howie Roseman, out of the free agents available, gets done and brings back to Philly?
Well, personally, I feel like it's been my preference, especially since they moved on from Darius Slay. I think Isaiah Rodgers should be their next kind of focus because I don't think it's the strongest free agent cornerback class. I don't think it's the free agent draft class at the position either. And we kind of saw how important Isaiah Rodgers was. I don't think people realize how well he played, given the situations that he was thrust into. Because he's been putting the middle of games. It's not like he had a whole week to prepare as a starter. He had maybe just a handful of starts all season long, and he still played well. But the fact that he's coming in cold off the bench against usually teams' number 1, number 2 wide receivers, he's getting targeted, but he's still having he had forced fumble, had interceptions, broke up passes. He really did it all for the Eagles, and I feel like it was kind of such an underrated part of their defense. And I would really like to see him get that full-time role moving forward. I know people want to see Kelee Ringo get that chance, but I think it was pretty telling that Kelee Ringo essentially never got that chance while Isaiah Rodgers was there with Vic Fangio. That kind of tells that Vic Fangio was leaning towards Isaiah Rodgers. It seemed like early in training camp, he was one of the favorites to be a starter before Quinyon Mitchell kind of emerged. So the fact that they can kind of move forward, have Quinyon Mitchell on one side, Isaiah Rodgers on the outside, you can keep Cooper DeJean in the slot, still have Kelee Ringo off the bench. I feel like that would be a great situation to have and to kind of secure moving forward. But on the flip side, I also understand if he wants to kind of test his market and see what other teams think about him as well.
As he should. If he can get a bag, hey, nobody's going to knock him for that. But yeah, if you can get him back there as the starter, we should get one thing straight because there's been some, I don't necessarily take it as being factual or accurate, but, some national media analyst, I won't name specifically, but going with the whole Slay being gone take and then Cooper DeJean having to move to outside corners, so you're losing 2 starters and all that. That is never ever going to Cooper DeJean is your slot corner of the future. And in today's modern NFL, slot corner is just as important. Maybe you could argue more important potentially than an outside corner. So I got a few comments, not a whole lot. I think that Eagles fans understand, but the national side is you can move Cooper DeJean there. So then all of a sudden you fill 2 spots in that scenario. That is not going to happen. I do hope that Isaiah Rodgers gets signed, of course, but the special teams element is another big factor too. The ability to return, his speed, never hurts to be able to be versatile. Another weapon there. So we'll see. I think a lot of people would love it though, based on recent comments for sure.
Just one more point also on the Cooper DeJean whole, in the slot being on the outside. I think he was recently on Pardon My Take, the Barstool podcast, and he actually said himself, they asked him like, "Oh, do you want to go outside?" He was like, "No, I actually like playing in the slot, especially like in our defense. It seems like he also wants to stay in the slot, so it's not like he's like pushing for the outside job. He realizes how important of a role he has." He said like, I think he mentioned potentially being outside like in base defense, but like you said, basically your base defense these days is nickel. Like nobody really plays just two corners and three linebackers anymore. So those days are long gone. And I feel like being a slot corner, like you said, is becoming just as important. Maybe not out as important as your number one outside cornerback, but I think having a good slot cornerback is more important than having a good number two outside cornerback, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm glad that you brought that up too about him mentioning where or preference of where he might want to play, because if we remember a year ago or about a year ago, whenever Isaiah Rodgers got signed, he had mentioned himself that he had a conversation with Christian Parker, and he was like, hey, I kind of already know the answer to this, but just to verify, because when he first got signed, a lot of people were saying, hey, there's your slot corner, right? Like Isaiah Rodgers is going to do it. And he had very, very sparingly played a few snaps at slot corner, but he was adamant about it and saying that he told Christian Parker, he's like, no, I'm an outside corner. That's the position that I play. I'm not a slot. And so similarly, if Christian Parker's having that conversation with him, I'm sure that he would be open to, if Coop were just being like, no, I would love to try it or whatever, then potentially. But with him coming right out and be like, no, I prefer that. I enjoy it. Fangio's defense, he's had success, obviously, but I think that speaks for itself. So we'll see. Be interesting.
Yeah, I think given how well that defense played and the elite level that they were at, especially in the Super Bowl, I feel like the Eagles should do as little as possible to kind of disturb all of the good that they did. And I feel like bringing back Isaiah Rodgers is a huge part of that as well.
Yeah, and also one more thing just for Coop. I mean, you can't really change roles or positions, can? I mean, like if you intercept a pass on your birthday in the Super Bowl and return it for a touchdown, like that's like just illegal. That's against the rules to change positions. It feels like you're solidified for the remainder of your career to be a slot corner. That just can't change. So, you'd be going against the grain of everything that people believe in. If you all of a sudden said, hey, Cooper DeJean's no longer your slot corner in Fangio's defense. He's a stud in that role. He's a game changer.
I mean, he pretty much established himself as the best slot cornerback in the NFL in his rookie season, I feel like. So doing anything to mess that up would just be silly.
Yeah. He's a stud. One of the best, speaking of one of the best, Saquon Barkley, as we mentioned a second ago, but Saquon Barkley, Zack Baun, both those guys getting paid. The Saquon one was a little bit surprising. The Zack Baun wasn't. We were, shout out to you, sir. Shout out to both of us for being very close on the predictions there for the contracts. And we've gotten things wrong. I know. So people will be like, oh, yeah, we know. But we say it whenever for the Zack Baun deal. That one was not as surprising. But Saquon, I did not anticipate that one at all. It's totally well-deserved. And, as we were alluding to a second ago, but just speaks to the organization. Take care of the players. They earned it. They're going to pay things up front. The signing bonuses, everything else. And that's why players want to show up to Philly. You play well, you're going to get rewarded. There's simple as that. But best thing ever, getting those guys signed.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by the Saquon Barkley move because, I mean, it feels like obviously you can't really argue against it, like you said. I mean, the season that he had couldn't have been a better debut season than maybe the best debut season in NFL history. I mean, Offensive Player of the Year, it's like winning the Super Bowl. I mean, he broke records. I mean, everything he did, like on the field, off the field, like the player that he is. And I feel like that really played into why they paid him kind of early is because of how much of a leader he was. And you saw it in the Super Bowl mic'd up, just the way he was just like, it was 24-0, but he's like, nope, stay right here. Don't look at the scoreboard. Like, this is still a game. But like, he wasn't letting anybody kind of celebrate too early, where maybe that happened a couple years ago and they got a little bit too ahead of themselves with the halftime lead and kind of threw themselves out of it mentally. But he wasn't going to let that happen. And I feel like it's a little, I could understand some people like kind of questioning it because even with Zack Baun, because I mean, you look at it and it's just like, this might be the best possible scenario for both of those players where like now moving forward, they might be on the decline relative to this season. And now you're paying them significantly more in the future. So it's like, I can understand an argument in that regard, but at the same time, for both Saquon Barkley and Zack Baun, I feel like you had to keep those guys around there. They've proven themselves as foundational players. And yeah, they paid Barkley early, but Howie Roseman likes to get ahead of the market. And right away, you saw like James Cook tweet the eye emojis. So there's going to be running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson. These guys are going to get paid. So he's kind of getting ahead of that, where now Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are probably going to beat out Saquon Barkley's market. And it's going to look like a steal that the Eagles locked him up for that early. So like he was probably going to, whereas if they left it untouched and didn't sign him to an extension, now when those guys signed their contract, maybe Saquon would have went to Howie Roseman like, hey, I want to be the top paid guy. So now he kind of got ahead of it and kind of avoided that obstacle. And then obviously, like you said, for months now, we've been saying Zack Baun should have been their highest priority. They got it done. I'm glad he didn't even hit the market because it shows how much they value him and how important he is in Philadelphia.
Yes. And, a couple of years ago, if you were to say Howie Roseman's going to pay a linebacker and a running back $37 million for one season, someone would be like, get out of here. That's never, ever happening. But it just goes to show, you know what? He learned. He's evolved. He's not willing, or he's willing to change things if it's because he viewed Saquon as a playmaker, right? Which he is. But then same thing for the linebacker position. You got a guy like Vic Fangio. Maybe JG doesn't have quite the same clout to be able to go to Howie and say, hey, pay my linebacker. But Vic Fangio says it, Get that Italian flair, too. Big Dom probably showing up in Howie's office saying, pay the man.
the whole Italian crew just went to Howie's office like,
yeah,
sign him. You know what to do.
This is happening. You're not getting away from this. Oh, yeah. But it's great to see it again. Like this story of 1 year, $33.5 million. Dude that did like special teams, 5th year in the league, hadn't done much, and we're all saying like, okay, hopefully he's able to make an impact. Maybe he's an edge. Maybe he's inside linebacker. Then you start hearing a couple of comments from Fangio, and that was instantly where, like, hang on, there's something else going on here. This is not an edge player. This is a guy that Fangio is very high about because unsolicited, they ask about the linebacker position, and before anybody else, not Kobe Dean, let me tell you about Zack Baun. Like, okay, this is interesting, but to see it play out the way it did, and to your point, maybe not. Maybe he can't live up to this for the next couple seasons. An All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year finalist, who knows? But there's still a case that you could say that there is a chance, even as ridiculous as the season that he had, that he could get better. Because it's only 1 year in the system of Vic Fangio to learn that more, to be even more comfortable in the system that he is. He's playing with, heck, they'll end up having, 9 of the 11 starters on defense that could return based on where they're at right now. And it's unlikely, but they could get even more than that. So basically the same core, the same nucleus of that defense that was the number 1 defense a season ago, and just more time to learn under Vic Fangio. So, again, you never know about the All-Pro part. Can he do that again? But it's a huge positive nonetheless. And I say it's incredibly well warranted. Congrats to him. I said this thing on the live stream earlier. Anything else that happens after this point is gravy because you got your leader. You got your leader on defense locked up. Now there's that was the one issue. That was the one big concern. If you didn't get Zack Baun, where do you go else? But they got him, so you should be fine. Yeah,
and it's like I'm always going to have a kind of a special just connection to Zack Baun because of that Week 18 game when I was in the post-game locker room and I'm running around like trying to find my opening to talk to somebody. And he's just standing there. He just finished talking to John Clark. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just go up to him and see. And I asked him the question. His response went viral where I just asked him about how important like fit is in professional sports and not just the NFL. And he kind of talked about like how he thought, like he thinks about, it's like, what, like how many other people are out there like me where like they're just not in the right area. And I kind of fell into the right position in Philadelphia. Obviously he made the most of it. And it's just so cool, like you said, to see him kind of go from $3.5 million with he laughed at the Pro Bowl incentive to now he's an All-Pro Defensive Player of the Year finalist and one of the highest paid like linebackers in the NFL. It's just awesome to see.
Good for him. And on that topic too of the whole fit, because you do look and you see sometimes guys that come over to different systems, they're great. Others that don't, who knows? We're still holding out hope for Bryce Huff, assuming that he's still on this roster, but they don't all hit that way. However, I did ask you this beforehand, so I'm curious to get your take on this. Who do you think the sleeper this year, if there is one, do you think there's a sleeper of a Zack Baun of sorts in free agency that maybe Philly could sign or at least look into? Who's that Zack Baun this year?
So I'm going to give you 2. And ironically, one of them could literally be the next Zack Baun because of very similar kind of career projection too. And that's going to be Baron Browning, who was drafted by the Broncos when Vic Fangio was there. And Vic Fangio used him as an inside linebacker for his rookie season. He played well, seemed like a promising player. Vic Fangio obviously moved on. Then another regime came in. He was switched to an edge rusher. Then he got traded to the Cardinals. They kept him on the edge, and now he's hitting the free agent market. So he didn't really pan out as an edge rusher, showed a little bit of promise as an inside linebacker, and now he's on the open market. So I really do wonder, and I've tweeted it before, like there's going to be players out there on the free agent market now that the team's going to be like, hey, didn't do great at edge rusher. Look what the Eagles did with Zach Baun. Let's see what we can do with this guy, moving him an inside linebacker. Obviously, there's going to be some that pan out. There's going to be some that like fail terribly. So I'm really interested to see kind of Baron Browning because he literally fits that mold of a Zach Baun. But then a player that's not going to be an inside linebacker, but could have kind of that potential of turning their career around in a Zach Baun-esque way is Peyton Turner. It might be kind of a name that people really aren't like kind of surprised by because he was a former first-round pick, but he never panned out in New Orleans, was always hurt. He was finally healthy last season, had 4 batted passes, 2 forced fumbles, 2 sacks. So not the craziest stats, but he's 6'6", 270 with 35-inch arms. Like all the tools are there. Now if he can stay healthy and you get him in a better situation, the Eagles themselves have seen so many former Saints players kind of flip their career around in Philadelphia. Obviously Malcolm Jenkins and Zach Baun, who we just talked about. So I wonder if Peyton Turner might just be the next one in that regard.
There we go. And don't forget about C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So, we'll just keep fishing from that same pond. We have these certain organizations where all of a sudden you see guys coming back and, Kellen Moore took a lot of guys down to New Orleans. So sure, if this is an opportunity to take a player and say, hey, guess what? Here's another one. So thank you for that, by the way. But keep an eye out for that, of course, because we have had a number of uncanny predictions from the man himself. So you never know. Keep an eye out for the free agency. Make sure to follow, of course, at DeBona NFL. Lots of incredible content, first info, tips, everything else, all the insight, more insight than you ever would think is possible, quite honestly. So make sure to follow Anthony and let us know your thoughts too. Who's your sleeper? Let us know in the comments. Sleeper for free agency. Who should Philly go after? Let us know what you think about our takes as well. We can agree to disagree if we don't necessarily hit everything. But I think that overall we're all excited for free agency again, right around the corner. And it's one of the best times of the year. I would still argue, playoff time and Super Bowl and everything else. But it's exciting to see the makeup of the team and everything else moving forward. So appreciate you hopping on it as always.
It's the best. Like I said, I love this time of year. The unknown is so exciting. And I know there's going to be a name that nobody expected that Howie Roseman probably signs out of nowhere. So I'm just excited to find out who that will be. There
we go. All right, everybody. Appreciate it again. Make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn the notifications on because there's probably going to be some breaking news. Would imagine so with the week that is upcoming. And so breaking it down, going live with anything that happens. And as always, you know what it is. Go Birds.